that we do each time that we have a program like this, we'll give you a little extra something at the end. So yes, that's coming for you. In terms of establishing a coaching program, our agenda is to dive into who is involved, when you do it, where you actually do it, and then the how-to. So we'll have specific ideas for those areas. First, in terms of who, it's considering who is it important to have buying in to the concept of the coaching program, who is going to organize it and manage it, and then who is going to actually do the coaching. We will take, as we go through each one of these in turn, by the way, and after we talk about who is coaching, we're going to talk about who's actually coached. So starting out with buys in. It is incredibly important to start at the top and get the buy-in to the coaching program, because what they think and say trickles down and influences everyone else. So who are the players at the top, and what is going to work for them in terms of buying in to actually having a coaching program in the organization? So think about what you're going after there. Think about how you're going after them. So you want to approach them in a way that's effective and give them what they care about. Very commonly, and I do realize this is stereotyping, at the same time it is often the case, they really want to know the facts and what the bottom line impact is. So getting that straight and being prepared in terms of presenting that succinctly is going to make a huge difference. Once you've started at the top and gotten the buy-in with the upper management, and we'll go into more detail on how, you want to, of course, continue that flow and get your middle management level buy-in. Very often your middle managers are themselves being coached. They have people they supervise that are coached, etc. So it's important that they are fully engaged in this process. And frankly, you want that buy-in organization-wide so that everybody in the company is aware of this. It's seen as a benefit, a true, hey, this is an extra, my company cares about me, they're investing in me. It's often perceived as getting the corner office with the window when you get that coach. So creating that buy-in throughout is absolutely essential at the front end of having a program. Now, in terms of who's going to actually organize and manage a coaching program, you've got options, of course. Very often what we're seeing is organizational development is the best area to put it. That's where we're seeing the greatest successes with company programs. Sometimes you have a separate organizational development department. Sometimes that is within other departments. So another common one is if you have, for example, an organizational leadership department, and then often we see one or the other or both of these fall within the scope of human resources. So be clear on where you want the management of the program happening. And then make sure whoever is going to be in charge of managing this and running it, organizing it, etc., has credibility, because they're the ones who are putting it out there. And it's important that they're perceived as having that credibility. You want them to have respect so that what they do share and provide really is accepted, acknowledged, etc. Very, very significant consideration. In terms of who actually does the coaching, how do you figure that one out? So first off, whoever is doing the coaching, yes, you want them to be trained. What we're seeing is the biggest mistake is we say, okay, well, we're going to have this coaching program and our coaches are going to be these different individuals from inside the company, and then there's zero support for them, zero training for them. And training is absolutely a starting point. So making sure they're prepared for it. You want them to be competent in terms of what they're doing if you're going to get the return on investment for having a program. This makes sense. Anybody you put into any role, we do that first. Coaching itself has specific competencies, so you're developing that. Another big consideration is when you have coaches from inside your company doing coaching, you want to make sure they have a coach available to them. Just as they are serving others, you want someone there supporting them in what they do as a coach. And then think about the resources you're providing. So very often in a company coaching program, you're going to have templates for coaching agreements. You're going to have templates that the coach and their client are working on together in terms of identifying goals, actions, etc. Sometimes you have some basic questionnaires for them as a starting point in the coaching relationship. You also want to think about having resources available to them for their own ongoing learning opportunities and that are available in turn to their clients for their ongoing learning, etc. So big areas, thinking through all of that. Now, in terms of who's actually coached, most commonly we're seeing it offered for high potentials and leaders in transition. Of course, at the executive level, we're seeing that frequently. When you get to the executive level, best practices in coaching is actually to bring in external coaches. In other words, instead of having employees of the company, bring in coaches from outside the company to work with your executives. And then the management level, offering it there. So back to our trickle-down effect. And here's what's fascinating. Best practices show that when coaching is available to everyone at all levels, that's where you get your greatest return. And sometimes people say, well, that gets pretty expensive. So American Management Association studies at this. They say internal coaches for your entry-level to mid-level management. It's cost-effective, and it does work for people. Another consideration is at that level, think about the opportunities for group coaching, and then think about the opportunities in terms of training coaches who are team leaders, etc., so that it's more readily available and more cost-effective for the organization. Now, when do you actually do the coaching? And when do you start the program? So we'll talk when to plan, when to start, and when to coach. So with when to plan, of course, we're going to say now. It makes sense. The bottom line is coaching really is a tool of choice as far as organizational development, as far as employee engagement, productivity, retention, et cetera, et cetera. So absolutely dive into that. It is an opportunity to maximize what's happening inside your company with everyone that's there. It's an opportunity for growth of the organization, and in some cases, it is the tool for the turnaround. So it makes sense doing the research, looking at that. So when you start, first part is creating that buy-in and creating that at all levels. It's also about being prepared. And prepared means having a plan, fleshing out the details of it, having a process in place, and having the people there for it. Now, a couple of thoughts for you on that. We do have a white paper that we make available on how to start and run a coaching program, and there are lots of specific examples in there that can be pulled from in terms of your plan. We talked about the specifics behind having a company manual, what you want to include in there, what kind of forms to have available to yourself that you will use in this coaching program, etc. So it goes into a lot of detail. Another big area for planning is how do you separate the coaching function and activities from other functions and activities inside the organization. So, for example, we've got trainers, we've got HR professionals. If they are, in fact, also coaching, which is very common, how are you separating their HR role, for example, from their coaching role, or their trainer role from the coaching role? Because they're very, very different in terms of what's happening and the scope. So definitely be thinking as you're planning on that. And we give you, as I mentioned in that white paper, lots more detail on that. The objective right now is the awareness. That's a big consideration. Now, in terms of where do you actually find your coaches? We'll look at options there where you do the coaching, and then, of course, the where to train piece of it. So where to find coaches? Internal coaches. So consider your leaders in the organization. And when we say leaders, we're talking leaders at all levels. So back to the team lead concept. And then, of course, in some organizations, going higher and higher. Now, here's an interesting one for you. Sometimes what's happening is we're seeing very high levels go through the training, even though they're actually not going to be the coaches providing the services. And it's back to that piece we talked about earlier in terms of the buy-in. Now, leaders in the organization that are being managers, supervisors, team leads, etc. These are natural in terms of the coaching. Now, consideration when you do this, it is often helpful to have a coach that is outside the chain of command for doing the coaching. So yes, it's great if the boss or the manager knows coaching and is themselves a coach, and then what you do is you match them across different departments or silos inside the organization. It's going to be more effective in the actual coaching relationship. Very commonly we're seeing people pulled from HR departments, OD, TD, etc., for actually doing the coaching. Now, in terms of finding and choosing these people inside your organization, one possibility is having nominations from people. If you go the nomination route, be sure that when someone is nominated, you're checking with them that they actually are interested in doing the coaching, as well as the fact that they got nominated. Alternatively, organizations will have an application process so that somebody applies to be one of the coaches, and then in exchange for doing that, you're providing them with the training, etc. So it's actually a huge benefit to them because of the training you provide, and then also the visibility factor, and then, of course, several of them are motivated by the career opportunity behind that. So think about your process in terms of where you're finding them. If you are also looking yourself or in your program for the external coaches, how do you find them? Well, one way is to research. You can go online and find companies and organizations that provide coaches. Another big place that people go, interestingly enough, is Amazon, because what they'll do is find the books that have been published recently by coaches, and they'll look at the coaches that are actually getting published. So that's a resource. And then, of course, LinkedIn is definitely a hot resource for researching potential coaches. Another great way to find coaches is referrals. Talk to other organizations, other people. Who are they using? Who's working? How's it working, etc. So that's a resource for you. And then, of course, we really are interested in being a resource for you as well, because the Center for Coaching Solutions has literally hundreds of coaches that have gone through certification that are available, and we want to help match them. So that's a resource for you too. Great in terms of finding that. As far as training, there's two big options for training coaches. You've got external and internal. Fairly obvious in that regard. Let me talk for a moment on internal training. The American Management Association study said it is most common to actually do internal training, and that also is least helpful. They're finding that the best outcomes is to actually have external training for your internal coaches. And this actually makes sense. Coaching really is unique in terms of what it is and how it works. It's very different than what typically happens in terms of conversations. So the mistake of saying, okay, our HR department, our training and development department, yeah, this is right up their alley. It's the people in the communication, etc. Yes, and coaching is very different. Let me equate it to this. If you have someone that wants to be a doctor, we're not going to send them to dental school. There's a lot of related skill, a lot of related competency, transferable skill and competency, and it's very, very different. So it's the same concept with coaching. The study by American Management Association said, yes, your best practice for coaches is to have them trained outside of the organization. Now, the good news for you on that is that the International Coach Federation, which is the gold standard in terms of coach training, has approved well over 400 programs. So you have a lot of fabulous options for finding that external training. Yes, we want to be a resource for that, and yes, you have lots of options there. So, worth looking into. In terms of where you coach, there are a lot of questions about this. So if an organization, in fact, has everyone in the same building, the idea of face-to-face, and if you're going to do face-to-face, of course, sometimes you've got people that are in cubbies, and so having a private conversation there is unrealistic. And then here's the other alternative. Often, if the coach is one of your leaders and they have their own office space, we're thinking, okay, they can use their office. Well, the challenge to that is this. When the coachee goes in there, it's almost like going to think about it with your kids at the principal's office. They're in someone else's office, and that person's in that command and control position. And that's actually going to take away from the value of the coaching relationship. So when you have an internal coaching program and internal coaches, think about what conference room or other meeting space that's private and enclosed is available to them for those coaching engagements. And then, of course, how you're going to manage the scheduling of that space. Another alternative is online, using tools like Skype or FaceTime, or even a webinar tool like this. Many companies have tools they're using. Of course, the caveat to that is going to be the confidentiality piece. You want to ensure that whatever technology is used, it really is only accessible by the coach and the client. And that's it. And there's no recording of it, etc., because it's a confidential conversation. Telephone coaching, very common. Now, of course, here's a couple of thoughts on that. First off, yes, 80% of coaching is done on the telephone. When you are talking about a coaching program inside of a company, if the company randomly records phone calls, don't want to be using company lines. That's going to violate confidentiality on that. So an awareness there. If somebody else can actually jump on that line, etc., it's going to be something you want to avoid. So ensuring that if it is telephone coaching, online coaching, it truly is confidential. In other words, only the coach and the client have access to that conversation, zero recording, etc. So big significance. Another big one that comes up is people say, okay, is that going to be as effective? And fascinating, it's actually typically more effective to do the telephone coaching than it is to do face-to-face. And sometimes people say, well, I like to see their body language, etc. And what you'll find happens is for the individual being coached, they're actually watching the coach's body language and facial expressions. And that takes away from their own thinking and decision making, because subconsciously they start answering based on what they think the coach wants to hear or what the coach's reactions are. So having that telephone option is actually a really great tool. It also means for both the coach and the client, the coach is going to be far more effective in their note-taking because they can be writing while the client is talking. And for a client, yeah, they know the coach is taking notes. They're probably going to get copies of them. At the same time, by having it on the phone, when they're not seeing that, they're less focused on that, more into the processing, thinking, and exploring that you want happening. Now, the how-to. Of course, this is the meat of some of this that you were asking about. How do you actually create the buy-in? and we'll dig into that. Then we're going to talk about how do you do the planning for the program, and then how do you implement it. So let's start out with how do you create the buy-in for a coaching program. As an organization, start by documenting the reasons. What is the reason for having this coaching program? Are we looking to continue advancing? Hey, we're on a good path, we want to keep that up. Or are we going down the wrong direction, we want to turn it around? Is our reason for this coaching program because we want to develop the individuals and employees in the organization? Is our reason to increase engagement, productivity, etc.? Is our reason to support further innovation, etc.? So document what you want out of the coaching program. And think about it this way. You're going to frame what the result of the coaching program is. So when you document on the front end what you want out of it, that's going to help you in terms of measuring it later. Next, provide the research. So if you're going to create buy-in, and let's go back to the idea of buy-in at the upper level first. You go to that individual and you say, okay, here's the reasons for a coaching program in terms of what it does for us organizationally, what the objectives are out of it, and then give them the research. And there are a couple of kinds of research to explore. First off, research on the return on investment for coaching. And there are a lot of great studies out there. The normal range is anywhere from 500 to 700% return on investment. And that's incredible. It's fabulous. When you think about what that means to a company, that kind of a return on investment, how can you not have that coaching going on? And that bottom line impact is very, very significant. Now, another really great area to research is research similar companies that are doing coaching, because most organizations out there are either doing it or thinking about it. And when you find companies that are using coaching programs and what they're investing in those, it's going to have an impact. I was working with an organization recently, and they were talking about some of the really big name companies and how much they're investing in coaching. And what does that do when you're creating buy-in with the top levels? Well, it lets them know something. Hey, if these companies are doing it, and this one, and this one, and this one, gosh, all our competitors are doing this. This is something worth looking at. So it's a very, very useful tool there. And then, of course, in terms of creating buy-in, you want to involve people. So you start with going to the top level of management. Here's what we want to achieve with this. Here's the research that demonstrates the feasibility, how realistic it is we achieve that with this program. And then you want to start involving everyone. Have a way of surveying people throughout the organization, have a way of inviting input, etc. A couple of caveats there. When you do a survey, it is very, very important that you very quickly give everybody the results of the survey. Because if you do a survey without sharing the results, you're letting people know, yeah, it didn't really matter as far as that goes. And you want to share what you're doing because of those results. When people have a way to give their input to something, they're more involved in it. And then, of course, a way where they can ask questions, have them answered, etc. So that's part of what you're doing as far as marketing a coaching program. And some of you were asking about that in the questions you submitted ahead of time. Involve people by surveying them, by asking for input, by giving the opportunity for question and answer. It is also helpful. Yeah, you document the reasons and get the research targeting the top levels first. Have a summary of that can be disseminated throughout the organization so that everyone has access to that information. Okay, next step is your actual planning process. So we talked about research. Research also coaching programs. Who else is doing them? How are they doing them? What's their process for doing them? And then you want to outline your process. So I mentioned I've got that white paper. I'll share it with you. happy to do that. Let's go further. As far as your process, be thinking about all of the steps we're talking about here. The who, the where, the when, etc., and include that. Include your resources in the outline for the process. Have all of that in place. Now, I want to bring in one of the questions that was submitted ahead of time, asked about how do you create that safe place for having the coaching conversation where it can be private, productive, etc. So I'm going to go back to a couple of the other comments and bring that all together. So first off, depending on where you're coaching, we talked about if it is online or in the telephone, making sure that the only people that can access that particular conversation are the coach and the client. There's zero recording. If it is in a face-to-face space, making sure it's in a private room with the door closed and that it's not somebody's office, because if it's somebody's office, it's uncomfortable for the other person. The one exception to that is if it's the office of the individual being coached, that can work very well. On the con side to that, they're going to have more distractions. So your ideal really is a separate space. A lot of what goes into the safe space is also going to go back to confidentiality. So when we talk about best practices for an organization being to have external coaches at the highest levels of management, one of the reasons is that confidentiality. They want to know that what they're talking about is only going to the ears of the coach and that's it. And so internally, this can be a challenge. When you have internal coaches that are working with other internal employees, it's incredibly important that you discuss the confidentiality piece. An example that will have happen is you'll have a manager that says, yeah, I've got somebody on my team, coaching is a great opportunity for them. And then the manager says, I want to know, what's being discussed in the coaching relationship. And the coach says, oh, that's confidential. I can't give you that information. Well, the manager, if the notes are on a company computer, using company email, that kind of thing, can actually do an end run. And we have seen that happen where they'll go to the IT department and say, get me the information. So making sure that you're very clear on what notes are kept, where they're kept, who has access to them, etc. Got to make sure you're protecting the confidentiality. That's going to make a big, big difference to the individual being coached, is knowing where that information is and how it's protected for them. So a couple of significant factors. Addition to that, in terms of the planning, you want to get feedback. So when you do have a coaching program, and sometimes the informal program comes after there's been some coaching. You'll have external coaches working with people, for example. You can get their feedback as a starting point. Once you're implementing the program, etc., anticipate this and know that you want to get feedback. You want to get feedback from the coaches and from the clients. How's this working? How do we want to improve it? What are other things we want to be thinking about doing or providing here? So being very clear on that. And then, of course, planning your specific action steps in terms of how it's being managed, what your process is for selecting coaches, what your process is for selecting who actually is eligible to be coached. Get specific with your action steps. And then you move into the actual implementation of the plan within the company. And as you're doing that, you want to involve everybody. Hey, this is what we're doing, this is how we're rolling it out, what the steps are, etc. Make sure you're measuring your outcomes of it and then adjusting as you go. Now, recognizing we've used our 30 minutes, I'm going to very quickly point out some of the resources available to you and then open it up for additional questions. So resources, yes, the Center for Coaching Certification is available in terms of training. The Center for Coaching Solutions in terms of resourcing coaches. Then you've got outsourcing additionally if you want help in terms of consulting or training the people that are going to start and run the program. And then coaching people that are going to run the program. Next steps for you. I mentioned at the beginning I have something for you, and of course that is the case. So for those of you that are interested in a further conversation, I'm available. If you want to talk to some of our business development people directly, you're going to have that option too. Let me know that. Think about what resources you are going to access and use. Get intentional in your own process, and that's when you do your implementation. And go after those results and measure them. So I do want to thank you for being here. I appreciate your time, your participation, appreciate the questions you submitted ahead of time and as we went. I believe we've done a good job of answering all of those as we've gone through. And I appreciate the comments I'm getting in the question panel, so thank you as well. Those of you that are jumping, yes, I recognize that we've used our scheduled time. Thank you. And yes, I will email out a copy of this recording. So what will happen is it'll go on our YouTube channel. I'll send all of you a link. And then in that email, I'll let you know two things. One is if you do want to have the additional conversation, you can let me know and reply to that email. And what I'll do is actually send you a link to my calendar so that you can pick a time and schedule it, and we'll have that 30-minute conversation. And yes, I will also let you know that if you reply to that email, you can access the white paper. So another question. Okay, so this sounds like this is what we call an external coach, somebody who's in business as a coach and saying, okay, how can I use this to build opportunities for the coaching business? So a couple of different ways. One, of course, is supporting companies who are doing coaching programs, both in terms of setting it up and running it, and in terms of being a resource for them. The obvious resource for them is being one of the external coaches that they can use. Another great resource in these organizations is providing group coaching. It can be more cost effective for them if they have an external coach who's doing the group coaching. So that's an opportunity. And then sometimes you'll have companies that training in combination with the coaching is going to make sense. And so if that's your area of expertise, that's an example of an additional way you can do that. So excellent. Thank you for that. How do you market the coaching program internally? So a lot of the answer to that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. So do your research. What are the studies on the return on investment for coaching? What are the organizations and companies that are using coaching programs? What can you find out about that? And then having a summary of that. So yeah, you're going to have the presentation that you want to make to your upper levels of management. You also want something that you can make available company-wide. If you have an intranet, some sort of an electronic version of an online newsletter, etc. Or ideally, as you're developing a coaching program, you're going to plan a website for it. So that's another opportunity as well. Great question on that. I appreciate your questions. I believe that covers all of them. Thank you, all of you, for being here. Do let us know what else we can do to be helpful. And yes, thank you for your comments. So thank you, everyone.